Again,
Jonathan,
you know,
on this slide, what is the 21% rate change in 2024?
yeah. So this slide is showing so what happened there is that there was an increase in the base rate of 21%, and then a reduction in the hydroelectric rate adjuster. And the net of those two was a decrease of 5%. And that maybe would have been the more accurate chart to show. It's a little bit hard to show both the effects of the hydroelectric rate adjuster and the base rate in this chart. So that's what's going on there.
Yeah, probably would be best. And I mean, so the graph on the table on packet page 20 showed -5%. So
Yeah,
I think that's more realistic representation of what the customer saw. At least I hope
I
so.
agree. I agree, and we can take that comment and fix that when we come back to you in March. Okay, so I'm the major thing that I just want to point out on this chart, again, going back to what I was saying on the first slide, is that we may end up having a little bit more flexibility in FY 2025 and FY 2026 to to try and manage the differing sort of rate changes for different customer classes that we're going to see from the cost of service study. So some customer classes may be able to see less than 5% in FY 2025. We'll see how the final study turns out. But in future years, we're really expecting something a little bit more like 5% per year rather than what you're seeing here. Next slide. So you can see, there's a little bit of a timing issue with the settlement, the money from the settlement with the federal government. So it looks like we're really, really flush at the end of FY 2023. But once we do all the transfers that we got approved for FY 2024, our operations reserves will be below minimum. But we do expect to be able to get back up to the target over the forecast period. And then next slide.
Jonathan, just to make sure I understand, could you go back up 2 slides? The next slide before this, please. So the difference between the revenue line and the cost line is the amount that's going into the reserve. Is that the assumption?
Yes.
For 2025,
and it's not
2026, and 2027?
It's not just the operations reserve. It's a variety of reserves. For example, we received some money related to participation in the cap and trade program, and that, or repayments from other utilities related to loans we made from the electric special projects reserve. And those revenues, they show up as revenues, but they actually will be dumped right into other reserves, and they aren't really used to help the operations reserve. So there's some of that going on over the next few years. So it's possible in some projections in some years where it looks like we're in surplus, but actually those revenues are reserved for some other purpose, and they're not really used for the expenses that are seen here. It's a little hard to separate those out, but in an ideal world, we would be separating those out.
Got it. But the idea of planning for revenue that's substantially higher than costs in those years is in part largely driven by the desire to fill up the reserve. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And this is one area, this is one area where we might be in a little bit of a better position because of some of the positive factors that I laid out earlier. And you'll see some of that here on slide 16. For example, you can see some increases in the cap and trade, local decarbonization reserve. They're relatively small, but they are increases. The big thing I really want to point out here, and then the repayments to the electric special projects reserve that I was talking about, you can see that reserve increasing. But the big thing I really want to point out here is that the hydro stabilization reserve in this projection is only $8.5 million. And that was sort of the minimum we thought was prudent to remove the hydro stabilization adder in July. It is below the minimum that if that reserve is below 11 million and we have a down hydro year, it's possible we may end up needing to put in the hydro stabilization adjuster again. And I think we'd like to avoid that. So some of what you're going to see when we bring back our March proposal is using some of the one-time revenues associated with better hydro generation and resource adequacy sales to replenish that reserve, so we're in a better position for future dry years. We really like that to be at the target level of 17 million at least.
Can I ask a question on the prior slide?
Please.
So when we go below the minimums, so in this case, it looks like about 7 million at the end of 24. Can you talk about what the transfers either were or are planned that get us down there? And have we approved those that?
Yes.
So can you just tell us, refresh my memory on what is taking us so far below the minimum?
So 8.5 million is the transfer to the hydroelectric stabilization reserve. That's just to get it to that sort of minimum acceptable level. Another 10 million is repayment of loans that we took from the electric special projects reserve over the previous few years during the pandemic and during the drought to stabilize the operations reserve. And some of this decrease is also related to some of those heavy one-time capital investment charges that I was referring to earlier around fiber and electrification and customer major customer investments.
Okay, I guess as I looked through this, I saw us being below the minimum in several areas, which it feels like that ought to be an area that we're watching on behalf of the residents to make sure that we're not, getting low on everything in case in case of bad events. So it would be helpful to hear for each of these when we're below the minimum, why we are. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it had to do with the gas price spike last year and some of the factors I just mentioned. And when we brought the FY24 financial plan to council, it projected we would be below minimum in FY24, and I think we're actually doing a little better than we had projected. But we would have had to increase rates even further than we did, and that just wouldn't to get out of the red, not out of the red, but out of the back up above minimum. And that just wasn't really acceptable for the community last year. So we agreed on a slower recovery.
Thanks.
All right. So slide 17. So our distribution fund is currently negative. And again, some of this relates to those. This is much more related to those capital investments that I was talking about. And so where you're seeing the supply fund go negative, it's because we're trying to, going below minimum. It's because we're transferring some funds from the supply to the distribution operating reserve to cover some of these significant capital investments and bring the reserve back up above that negative level. And then we have a plan in the financial plan to bring that up within the target guideline range over the next few years. So you'll have more on that in our financial plan, but I think you'll see we're in a better position than I think even this chart shows. Last slide. Yeah, and so all I had wanted to talk about here was just that there's is about those capital investments, and you can see that reflected in this very high reappropriations reserve. These are that's where those one-time capital investments that came out of the reserve are reflected. And then this is our capital reserve, our CIP reserve, and you can see that it's projected to be low but remain within target over the forecast period. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Jonathan. Two quick questions. I'm wondering if in future years, if it's possible to, or even when you come back to us in March, include what past year's projections were and give us a sense of how accurate our projections have been. Can you just comment on that for the benefit of the commissioners right now? But is that something that you might be willing to add in the future?
Oh, we add that. That's a routine part of our financial plans. I don't know that we always highlight it in these slides, but we can make sure to have those in the backup slides, and you'll also be able to find it in the financial plan itself.
Great, thank you. And then the second question I had is just in terms of the cost of service study. Is that going to look closely at or is the current plan for the cost of service study to also include an assessment of like time of use component of costs in order to potentially inform?
We're doing some assessments of that, and we're working out the transition to time of use rates. But whether or not now is the right time to adopt those rates, I think is something we're still working out. But that analysis, even if whether it's published as part of the cost of service study or not, is definitely part of our own internal analysis. It's just a question of whether it's the right time to adopt those from a legal standpoint.
Totally understood. I mean, I think it's great that we're doing a better job of breaking down the differences between supply costs or generation costs and transmission costs. But I would just point out, like, as we do that, there's also this very strong time of use component, and we should be careful to I think that difference is only going to increase over time, and so setting flat rates for different customer classes, it could really have a very strong time of use component that probably should be accounted for in future rate setting.
Yeah, and we do have time of use rates for our largest customer classes, but we reflect seasonal differences right now in all the different rate classes. But we just don't have the physical equipment out there yet to reflect the intraday. But that will come over the next 2 to 3 years.
I would guess I would ask a related question, which is, are you doing does this have the COS study, does it have any study on the impact on carbon of the particular time of use, time of season pattern, seasonal use pattern of the customers? Again, given the great differences in our marginal generation over the day and over the seasons?
Well, the cost of service study doesn't explicitly address that, because its sole purpose is really to assess whether the rates reflect the cost to serve customers. However, it inherently does, because the time varying cost of electricity mirrors very, very closely the time varying carbon content, because gas generation is always the marginal generator. And so, the dirtier the gas, the dirtier the marginal generator, the higher the costs. So
it's not always a marginal generator, is it? I mean, solar is marginal in much of the summer and during the day, but
It's not really solar is marginal. Well, and maybe my information might be out of date, but when I was looking at the last information I have is that two things. First off, you're rarely your curtailment of solar is most frequent during wet years during the spring, because you have more and more solar generation and you have a lot of hydroelectric power. And so you end up needing to curtail some of that solar. But solar isn't marginal because it's not controllable. The gas, it really is those gas generators. If you need that extra unit of electricity, you can turn on a gas generator, but you can't turn on or a hydroelectric generator, but you can't turn on a lot of these other generators. And so during the summer, you have a lot of solar, especially at certain times of the day, but you have some gas generators that have to keep running through that through the middle of the day. You can't rely solely on the solar because they have to be ready to ramp back up in the afternoon when the solar turns off. So except for a very few hours where solar is actually being turned off, and again, usually that's happening just because of locational imbalances, not global grid imbalances, you're dealing with a gas generator. And so there's just a real alignment between cost and carbon. That may change in the future, possibly, but I think it's still a strong relationship right now.
Okay, maybe I'd like to discuss a little more offline, but it gets a little technical, but thank you.
Actually, Jonathan, I had one other question while we're talking about the cost of service study. Will we have a rate for fully electric customers?
So we are working on that, and there are challenges with it that are not readily apparent from someone looking to the outside. I can say that regardless of what we come out with over the next 2 to 3 years, as there's a transition to time of use rates, that issue with the tiered rates for residential electrification is going to go away. So no matter what, that issue is going to get relieved in the next few years.
Thanks. Do you have more on electric?
Well, I had a comment on the reserve funds. I think a number of commissioners have made, had questions and concerns about that, and particularly sort of trend among sort of sloshing money from one reserve fund to another. My suggestion would be that in each utility that we have, at least sort of 3 distinct funds, like for commodity. The wastewater is a little different, but a fund for commodity, a fund for operations, fund for CIP, maybe some others like debt service or transmission, things that we don't control like transmission. And then each category needs to be clean and not a combination of semi-related things. And I think it's really important that we not transfer money between the funds, because I find it very confusing. And I think it just kind of masks how we're managing the money, the activity that's represented by each fund. I think it'd be more appropriate when a fund, say, is high, put the money in Treasury, and when it's low, take money from Treasury in that particular utility. That way we'll have a better understanding of, well, why did that fund go low? And why is another one high? And I think it would be very helpful to report, at least on an annual basis, the status of each fund. It's low, why is it low? And, sort of tabulate that. That would be a really helpful addendum to the charts that we have that just sort of show they're going low. Because, I personally find it confusing that, this fund went low, so we took 10 million out of this other fund that's really not related. And so I think it's really important to keep the contents of each fund clean, to do root cause when a fund goes either above the high limit or below the low limit and report on that. I think it's not a criticism of any utility. It's just seems like a basic management practice to do root cause and after that improve. So anyway, that's my recommendation for the funds. I think.
Yeah. So just speaking to root cause, we are able to do root cause regardless of transfers between funds. So we are doing so we're not limited there. We still are able to do root cause regardless of the transfers. But we wholeheartedly agree with you, particularly with the electric utility, that these significant transfers between funds, even if we may be able to do root cause analysis, it obscures the public reporting of that root cause. And it's not something that we want to have happening. We're doing, over the last fiscal year and this fiscal year, we're doing some things to unwind that. And particularly with this cost of service study, we're going to realign the supply and distribution components of the rates so that we should see less of that. I mean, in the financial forecast we're building, we have no interfund transfers beyond this FY24 transfer we're going to need to do projected, because we've managed to realign the rates. So this is something that we got lax about in the past years, and it's something that we need to tighten up on. We agree with that recommendation. With gas, it's a little bit more complicated, in part because of the way we set the commodity rate, and there are some operational costs associated with managing the commodity rate that it is difficult to integrate into a monthly varying commodity rate without having to go to council month after month after month after month to change the rate. And so for administrative purposes, we do some transfers for the gas utility. And ideally, if it weren't an accounting nightmare, we would just have a single fund for the gas utility, but administratively, it's just not really workable. And so we're likely to continue doing transfers for the gas utility into the future, just because of the way the administrative dimensions of having to set those month varying commodity rates is just unavoidable. But with the electric utility, we definitely agree on that.
Right. Okay. I agree, that we could do root cause analysis, even if we keep sort of sloshing money between the reserve funds. But I think it's very helpful in business management to not do that, because then you can see, well, let's say the operations fund for electric, every year we seem to be underestimating our costs, and the reserve fund keeps getting lower, or every year it's high, we're overestimating our costs. I think the trends are very valuable in steering and managing the business. And so that's why I think that's valuable. I mean, there are two different things that
and
the performance.
That's why we agree with you on that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions on electric? Otherwise, I could turn it back to Lisa for the other utilities. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
For the gas utility, we're proposing to increase the distribution rates by 16%, which, as I mentioned in the overview, equates to an overall increase of 9% on the customer bill for gas in 2025. And with that, there are also increases in each of the subsequent years, 7% in 2026 and 2027, 6% in 2028, and 5% in 2029. The revenues are below the costs in the gas utility, and we need to raise the rates to bring the reserves back up to within guideline ranges, and also to bring the revenues in line with the costs. I also wanted to mention that the voters approved Measure L in 2022, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a later slide. And we're asking for some feedback on the amount of the 2025 transfer. Supply costs are expected to remain more stable this winter. We talked a little bit about the price spike last winter. The council approved a insurance policy for the winter months this year. And with that, it stabilizes the prices in Palo Alto. I'm actually going to skip a couple of slides, but go back if you want to talk about them. I wanted to talk a little bit about the overall structure of the gas utility costs. And I'm actually going to focus on this slide. You can see the distribution costs for running the utility in Palo Alto in green, and the capital investment costs of the distribution system in orange. And that those together are about 40% of the costs in 2023. And the blue slices of the pie are the supply, the prices, the cost of purchasing the gas, and the transmission costs of bringing the gas to Palo Alto. And then there's two environmental charges. One is the cap and trade program, which is a mandated state program, and the other is the city of Palo Alto's carbon neutral portfolio charge for purchasing offsets. I was going to jump to the slide on distribution cost drivers because that's the focus of this presentation. We have some of the similar cost increases that Jonathan mentioned. Health, retirement, and other overhead costs continue to increase. Construction, particularly underground construction costs, have increased as well. We have included the costs for cross-bore into this preliminary presentation, and we are potentially going to adjust those depending on what the recommendation is for cross-bore. And then we also had an increase in transfers to the capital projects that affected the gas utility. So the voters
I'm
approved.
sorry,
Yes.
what was that last one? An increase in overhead transfers?
Yeah, that actually might be phrased not the best. There's a capital projects fund that the city has, and that capital projects fund does certain projects across the city, and we didn't forecast enough for that transfer that needed to happen from the gas utility to that capital projects fund.
So these are capital projects that both involve gas and other undergrounding?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So the voters approved Measure L in 2022 that approved the 18% of the gas utility gross revenues to be transferred from the gas utility to the general fund, and also said that the council may elect to transfer less. Last year, the council approved a transfer of 15.5% for the fiscal year 2024 transfer. So that was a lower amount than the 18%. And based upon council's direction, staff is suggesting an 11.9% transfer for fiscal year 2025. And let me go into a little bit more details about that. And the other alternative would be to transfer the 18%. The 11.9% is designed to gradually increase the transfer up to 18%, the voter approved level, by 2027. So what this slide shows is that in the first table at the top, it shows the gas rate projections and the transfer of so I'll go through the rows in that table. The transfer of 11.9% is would have a 9% overall rate impact on customers in 2025. And then an 18% transfer would have a 14% rate increase for customers in 2025. And you can see the graph on the right that shows the 11.9% scenario at the bottom in orange, and then the 18% scenario at the top in red. And what's happening there is that there was the spike in revenues in 2023. So the 18% is an increase in 2025 because the transfer, it refers to gross revenues from 2 years prior. The table on the bottom shows the percent of gross gas utility revenue to transfer from 2 years prior. And it, in the first row, shows the transfer of 11.9%. So you can see that 11.9 in 2025 going up to 18% in 2027. And then the transfer of 18% alternative listed there as well.
Can you, well, first of all, in dollar amount, can you tell us what those are? And also, if you can remind us when the voters voted for the 18%, what would the dollar amount of that transfer be? I have some memory of last year, one of the reasons it was lower is because the dollar amount was going to be higher than sort of what the expectation was, and some, I don't know, 15 million, 6 in my head, something like that.
Yes, the 11.9% is a $9 million amount approximately in 2025. And you can kind of follow that along on the orange line there. And the 18% in 2025 is $13.6 million. And you can see that on the red dotted line to the right. In the past, my understanding is that the transfer has increased more with a CPI increase. And that last year, the increase was calculated as a CPI increase with a cap of 6%. So that's how the council, that's how the number was derived for the 15.5% for the 2024 transfer.
And what was the dollar amount of that transfer, do you recall?
I'm going to have to look up the exact number, but it's around, it's 7.6 million. And could you also remind us what exactly Measure L, is it up to 18%? Is it 18%? And how long does it go on?
It's up to 18%. I just looked at the text. So
Okay.
it's up to 18%.
Okay, and then how long, is it perpetuity, in perpetuity? Okay, it's, okay. Thanks. This slide shows the costs and revenue for the gas utility, and it assumes the transfer of 11.9% that we just talked about in 2025. So it shows the past rate increases for the gas utility at the top in gray, and then the 9% is the increase that we're discussing here for 2025. And you can see the costs in the cost bars that, and you can see that the costs are above the revenues. We already, oops, went forward. Now, I meant to say that in the gas utility last year, our projection was for the operations reserve to dip below the risk assessment level for 3 years. And so this projection is actually an improvement on that, and the reserve is expected to go below the minimum at the end of this current year, fiscal year 24, and then recover in 25 and 26, and then be within the guideline range for 2027 and the rest of the forecast period. And this chart shows the projection of the reserve levels, the year-end 2023 levels, and then the projection going forward. And you can see that the supply rate stabilization reserve was negative at the end of 2023, but there are enough funds in the operations reserve to cover that. But we were not able to execute the transfer at the end of the last year. So you'll probably see some revised language from us in the reserve guidelines in order to address that and make sure that we're able to do that transfer every year going forward. Are there any other questions on gas?
I have a question on the prior slide. So the gas operations reserve projections, this is at 11.9% transfer. Does this get affected differently if it's 18%? We try to reserve not get affected by the amount that's transferred?
We tried to model that by keeping the operations reserve impact similar across the two transfer scenarios, but the rate increase is different in those two different scenarios. If you'd like, I can go back and show you that in the table.
I recall that it was different. I just didn't know if the reserve would be affected. So it sounds like you hold the reserve stable in both scenarios and you only affect the rates.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Shall we talk about water?
Sure, unless, did you want feedback about which percent we're recommending, or it's just for our information now?
Yes, if there's any feedback, we would be very interested in that.
Well, my feedback is not to raise it all the way up to 18. It seems like as our costs are going up, the percentage, the transfer amount is going up, and windfall might be too strong of a word, but I don't know that that was in the spirit, despite the language of the Measure L. I don't think the spirit was to keep adding to the general fund with increased rates in the gas utility.
I don't know what else it could have been because but I agree with Chair Siegel that I would go with the lower amount. Of course, it is an unusual situation because we have the utility asking, making a recommendation on how much they should be taxed. But I think when we're in a reserve building environment, building the reserve, which is going to raise the rates, and adding the extra on top of it is more of a burden. If we were in a stable reserve situation, then I could see going to the higher number. How was the 11.9% chosen, by the way?
It was chosen as an extension of the council's direction to gradually go back up to the voter approved level of 18%.
Yeah, the voter approved cap of 18%, but yeah, okay.
I would agree that I would support the lower level. I think that the annual increases in rates expected is a little bit higher than I'd like to see it every year going out. And so I just think it would, that increase, the 14% increase, I could see that being a little bit of a shock for people and would rather see it kind of flattened out a little bit. So I support the 11.9 as well. Can I just ask one final question on gas? Pursuant to our early comment by the interested citizen that raised questions about gas more generally, I'm wondering if these reserve projections account for the major efforts to electrify the Palo Alto populace, and how we're accounting for expected changes in demand over time. Not to open.
This preliminary projection includes the capital budget amount for that I think is upcoming in the budget for 2028 for gas decommissioning. And then it also has a placeholder for electrification costs that we don't know specifically exactly what those costs will be at this time.
Did that answer your question?
Sort of. I mean, there's a placeholder. It sounds like there's some uncertainty in that.
So my question was to Carla and to Lisa. There's $400,000 in this year's budget in 23,
Okay.
or it's in this year's budget to actually start the study, to bring on a consultant to help us that's going to transition into this. I need to find out where the budget monies are, but there are dollars allocated in the SCAP funds during that period of time. So I just wanted to clarify if it was in 23 or 24. So I'll clarify with all of you.
Yeah, I certainly got, and I'll raise this in water, but it's sometimes not clear how we're factoring in major structural changes that are happening across utilities in these very smooth curves that are included here. And it's not that it's not there, but I think you could get the most out of the UAC by like opening up a little bit, like what's under the hood, and you know, how are major changes in gas usage going to balance or you know, impact across the distribution costs and the supply costs and the operating costs over a long period of time. How's that happening on the electric side? What does this mean for water on the One Water Fund and some of these other big changes that aren't currently incorporated in? And it's not a criticism of the good work that's being done, but I think that's where the UAC can be particularly helpful, is in trying to think through these big changes happening in utilities and what that ends up meaning for rates long term.
Can I speak to this a little bit? We have done some of these analyses outside of the financial plans. It's hard to incorporate them in the financial plans as alternative projections because the changes are so large. But a few years back, we did some analysis separately that I can forward out to the commission about what would happen with, you know, under a few different scenarios of eliminating all single-family residential gas use and then greatly decreasing commercial gas use, and the sort of different rate impacts you get if you approach that in different ways. And it was all very preliminary. And so we budgeted, as Dean and Lisa were saying, we budgeted some money in the for a gas transition study that we're just working on getting underway. And then we have a similar study with the SCAP that's going to council on the 16th called the SCAP funding study that'll do something similar both for the electric utility and funding electrification. And we're going to talk to the UAC about each of those studies. But it's really hard to, and I will also add that we looked at this topic as part of the integrated resource plan back in December as well. We had some projections, a high projection with high electrification loads. So it's there, and we're talking to you folks about it, but it's very hard to do in the financial plan because the changes are so large that you really need a separate study to predict what sort of sea change differences there are going to be. So you'll see more on this coming up. We're just not doing it in the financial plan.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And I think just knowing that that is forthcoming is provides a great deal of peace of mind.
Good.
Are there any other questions? Or should we move to water? Thank you very much for all of that feedback and for all of your questions. We really appreciate it. So for the water utility, for the distribution rate portion, we're proposing a 9% increase. The operations reserve, the water reserves are in better shape than the other utilities. However, we did utilize funds from the rate stabilization reserve and from the capital reserve last year as we saw reduced revenues due to the drought. And we have a plan to utilize all of the rest of the funds in the rate stabilization reserve and capital reserve. So there's a limit to how much we can do with the existing reserves. And I also wanted to add that since the time that we put this together, we do think that there's going to be an increase from SFPUC on our wholesale rate. The same thing has been happening regionally, that has been happening in Palo Alto, which is that the water sales have gone down due to the drought and then have not rebounded yet, and may not rebound to the level that they were before. But SFPUC has not yet released a rate range, and we expect to hear something informal from them soon in January. So when we return to you, we should be able to give a range. We're in this forecast relying on the most recent update from their rate projection from last May, where they did not anticipate increasing the SFPUC rate this July. That said, there's some important capital improvements coming up in the water utility, 2 tanks that need to be replaced and main replacements that need to occur. And those are large main replacement projects every other year. So we have to raise quite a lot of money to pay for those. And so the rate increase is very important. Last year, we limited the amount of the distribution rate increase because of a large commodity increase from SFPUC. So we did a 2% increase last year. And we thought that there would be a 7% increase. And with this preliminary projection, we're looking at 9%. But as I mentioned earlier, on the overall water bill, it's a 5% impact. I just wanted to note.
Sorry, the one thing, the water main replacement acceleration not included, what that means.
Yeah, this includes the budget amounts for the water main replacement projects at kind of the typical budgeted level. But if we want to accelerate the rate of main replacement to really bring it up to that sustainable, desirable level, then that is not included. We're just trying to note that this takes a certain view, but doesn't include some of these possible future costs, like accelerating main replacement. And then we're also doing our One Water study and looking at possible different supply options. And some of those could potentially be more expensive, and those are not included yet. It's not possible for us to include those yet because we're still developing the costs and looking at those options and haven't brought those to the UAC or to the council yet.
Can you clarify? I mean, I understand that this is still very much a work in progress, but can you clarify when different One Water supply alternatives might be coming online, or when we would start to incur either debt or like actual capital expenditures associated with some of those?
I think that would depend upon what the water supply is. If it's something that takes, 10 or 15 years of planning, then it might be outside of this forecast time period. If it's something that we can do more quickly, certainly conservation is the one that comes to mind, that maybe we could do that as early as 2025. So I think it depends on which supply option, and we are currently working on compiling all of those costs and details with our consultant, and do anticipate bringing you some details on that as soon as we can. This provides a little bit of information about water sales. Basically, net of the water sales revenues were lower than forecasted, and net of supply cost savings that amounted to about $2.4 million. Expenses were higher than our forecast. This included transfers out to the capital projects fund. There was an accounting adjustment to the beginning balance, and our CAP costs were higher than we anticipated. The operations reserve, I'll show you a chart of it in a minute. It's projected to be close to the minimum guideline range and then return to the target in fiscal year 2029. And we did lower our sales forecast throughout the time period based upon recent reductions in sales. I was actually going to go ahead, and you can reference these materials, but I was going to go ahead and I talked about that one. I was going to skip some of these and talk more specifics about cost drivers. So I mentioned drought-related water sales reductions, similar other drivers to the other utilities, and an increase in costs for rental of generator, generator rental. And there's also a cost for exposed pipeline and Arastradero that is included for water and for wastewater and for gas. I've lost my slide numbers here. Yeah, okay. So this is the cost and revenue slide. And as I mentioned previously, the gray numbers show you the past rate increases. And last year was an overall 5%. We're hoping to limit the increases to 5%. But as I mentioned, there's some factors that may make our forecast a little higher than this. But our revenues are below our costs. We're working through our reserves, working through all of the reserves in part of this plan, and we need to replenish our reserves and bring our revenues in line with our costs. So that's our plan.
Was there anything about the 5% number? I mean, because we had these much lower rate increases for the past 5 years, we're pretty low on our reserves. And I'm just wondering, is the goal never to go above 5 for water or something?
I think it's a fair question, and I was just going to get to the operations reserve. The operations reserve is fairly low, and we've seen in some of the other utilities, as I'll talk about in wastewater, that the operations reserve, dipped lower than we thought when we projected it, skimming along the bottom of the minimum guideline range. So I think it's a fair thing that we should go back and think about our water increase.
May I ask a question about the, back on slide 37, this 9% distribution rate increase? How does that, you had a number of helpful slides on the breakdown and cost, but the increase didn't, just talking about percentage increases doesn't help me understand how closely we're aligned with the breakdown in distribution versus supply costs to begin with. And so are we like coming back into pretty strict alignment with our actual costs, or is there still a discrepancy between our distribution costs and our supply costs, even if we have a 9% increase here?
I think that there is a slide that may help a little bit that shows the breakdown of distribution and commodity costs.
Yeah.
So for the water utility, it's about half and half, where the supply cost is about 25 million. And that reflects mostly just the cost of purchasing the water.
Right.
We also have losses, so that may be part of the answer to your question.
Yeah.
And then there's the distribution costs of 30.7%. This is for a particular year. I think it's projected 24. So in the water utility, we have a commodity rate that every customer pays per unit of water that they
From SFPUC.
that they use from the SFPUC. And so that is any losses or other costs associated with supply or anything like that would be kind of considered part of our distribution costs. We don't have any other mechanism to recover those costs. So it's one fund, and we're recovering that cost for every unit of water. And all of our water is supplied by SFPUC at this point in time.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I didn't know if it was like the capital improvements within SFPUC. I didn't know if that was broken out separately, but it's not.
Yep. That was all the slides I had for water. I'd be happy to try to answer any other questions, or if you have any feedback.
How has this breakdown in distribution supply costs changed over time? Do you know?
That is a really good question. I think it's mostly been 50-50 as far as I can recall,
Okay.
but I can try to make that come a little bit more clear out in when we do our financial plan.
Okay. And then in terms of the operations costs on the distribution side, is that mostly, like, do you know what the breakdown is between like labor versus electricity for pumping? Like at all?
I don't have that level of detail right here. Usually we do have a chart of the operation costs and a breakdown there. Let me look through the slides and see if I have that.
I think I may have asked something similar like 6 months ago and I just can't remember. So it's okay. Let's be efficient in time. We can follow up offline.
Okay.
One quick question, I hope quick. You have the comparison between the residential and commercial bills. What fraction of our water usage is commercial versus residential?
It's about 63% residential.
And the rest commercial, or is there another?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Commercial being broadly, everything else.
Restaurants and
Non-residential, yes.
offices. Thank you.
And are the rates significantly different between commercial and residential on a CCF basis? I just looked at the comparison with like other cities and was surprised to see such a big spread in the commercial and residential rate differences across cities.
Yeah, I mean, they are to some extent. The residential class, the single family residential class has a tiered rate. So they pay within a given month. If you go over 6 CCF of water usage, then the customer pays more per unit. And there isn't a tiered rate like that in the non-residential classes. The irrigation charge is also significantly higher. And these are things that we've examined in the cost of service study and that were developed as part of the intricate balance of factors that the cost of service consultant examined for each of the customer classes, consistent with the cost of providing service.
And I trust your cost of service study. It was just interesting to note how big of a spread there was in cost of service to residential versus cost of service to commercial. If the rate is actually reflecting the bills. Or sorry, if the rate is reflecting the cost to the utility.
Right. And one thing about the non-residential side of water usage is that it can vary more, like the composition of the businesses from one city to another are not necessarily similar. And then different cities also can sometimes use different rate structures to charge their customers. So from one city to another, and they may break down their customers into different customer classes from one city to the other. So we do the best that we can when we do these rate comparisons. We try to select the customer class that's most comparable to the way that we kind of split up our customers into classes, but they're not always the apples to apples type of comparison that you would hope for.
So you think it's more of an issue with comparison than it is and or just simply different water use profiles than it is a misalignment of the cost of service with the rates that are being charged?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there any other questions on water, or should we go to wastewater? So for the wastewater utility, last year, we brought to the council a series of 9% increases, 3 years of 9% increases in 24 through 26. And with that, we forecasted that we would be able to increase our rate of sewer main replacement from 1 mile per year on average to 2.5 miles per year on average. And that is very important for the utility in order to reach a sustainable rate of main replacement and try to replace the mains, the remaining mains that need to be replaced within their lifespan. And we estimated that lifespan is maybe approximately 100 years. And this plan would have achieved the replacement of all those remaining mains within 108 years. So 8 years, give or take, the lifespan of the pipes. Given what we'll show you in the wastewater utility and the state of the operations reserve, I should also say at the same time last year, it was very important to move forward with a large main replacement a year early. And so the council approved moving forward with that sewer main replacement in 2023. And so you'll see the movement of those funds to the reappropriations and commitments reserve. And that's the largest main replacement project the sewer utility has ever done. And it was important to move forward with it in order to coordinate with Caltrans, who is doing a repaving project on El Camino. So that happened in 2023. And then in addition to that, So I was going to say, so we knew that our capital reserve was going to be fully utilized for that, and that our rate stabilization reserve also was going to be drawn to zero. And we projected that our operations reserve would be at the minimum guideline level. And it turns out that our revenue projections were higher than actual revenue in 2023, and our costs were lower than actual costs in 2023. And so our reserve dropped to below the guideline range, and in fact dropped to negative $700,000. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, talk about some of the reasons for that, and talk about our plan going forward. Basically, the utility is going to need a little bit more time to recover. We think it's going to take more increases to get to that sustainable rate of main replacement. And in this projection, we talk about deferring the first of those series of capital projects from 2026 to 2028. So the last remaining main will no longer be 108 years old under this plan. It would be more like 111 years old.
Can I ask a question about revenue? And what are reasons why revenue would diverge from plan? I mean, are these volume? I assume they're not volume-based charges, but if you could just give a little
Yeah.
basic on
So
what the charges
in
are based on.
2023, the sewer service charge revenue was very close to what we projected that it would be. And our projection for other revenue was too high. So particularly the capacity fee revenue for new development was 0. And we had included an estimate that was more in line with our budget amounts. So that's what happened in 2023. I also don't want to forget to mention what's currently going on in 2024, which is that our sewer service charge revenue on the non-residential side is not, it's actually decreasing. So it's not increasing with the 9% that we thought it would. It's decreasing a little bit. And I think that our best estimate right now is that that is mostly due to reductions in usage from last winter. The commercial customers are charged based upon their 3 lowest months of usage in the winter, and that was lower in last winter. Sorry, what did I say? Water usage in the winter was lower. Not sure if that was because of business conditions or weather, the wet weather, but so that's another thing that's impacting revenue. It's not in this slide. This is focusing on 2023.
So is it, it's based on, their charges are based on water usage, and for residential, are we?
Residential is
just
a
flat?
monthly
Got it.
flat charge.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. And that this in 2024 is tracking with the projected rate increase. Yeah. So to touch on a few other areas, our CIP related costs were also higher than our projection. We did not project administrative costs. The CIP portion of administrative costs were too low, and our projection of usually we include a budget amount for CIP being lower than what was projected, or at least some of the costs being moved into a future year. But in this case, the costs were higher than projected, and the bid was higher. So there was a couple of problems there, and it led to our CIP costs being higher than we projected. Additionally, this fund was also impacted by a higher transfer out to capital projects. And so that said, I want to mention a couple of things that we're doing. One, we have reconciled all of our costs in 2023 with the accounting costs that were listed in the city's financial statements, and are trying to fully make sure that those are aligned so that we can do a better job of forecasting next year. And we've also convened a group of staff from engineering and admin, rates and budget in order to examine each of the categories where we were over or under, and try to reach consensus on what would be a better forecasting method in order to improve the robustness of our forecast going forward. So with that, we are confident that this won't happen again next year, but it does leave us in a position where we need to look for cost cutting in the current year and defer the first of the capital projects in this series of capital projects. So that's what we are currently working on, and that you'll see in the charts.
Can I ask you one question on that? Is
Yeah.
the other option to have a higher rate increase?
It is.
Right. I mean, yeah, I to defer replacing sewer mains that we had talked about a couple of years ago that were at, sort of end of life makes me really uncomfortable. And when I compare it to the residential bills of our comp communities, we're significantly lower, better than we are, I think, in the other utilities. And we're talking about really disgusting consequences, maybe, dangerous too, I don't know, but certainly something we wouldn't want to confront if we could avoid it. And my recollection was we had a discussion about accelerating the replacement because they were so old, and that was a couple of years ago. We chose the sort of mid-timing, if I recall, not the fastest because of budget constraints. And I don't know, I appreciate 9% sounds like a lot, but from a dollar amount, maybe it's a couple dollars and we can really have a big impact on when we start these projects.
Yeah, thank you for that thoughtful input. We really appreciate it. Just one, as I was looking back at what we told the council, we did present a range of options that ranged from 108 years to 114 years. So this is within kind of the range of what we talked about, but is not the expectation that we set.
Yeah, and I guess one other comment, sorry, Commissioner Metz, is that our reserves are, I mean, they're terrible in this utility. And it's hard for me to get my head around why we would recommend a rate increase that leaves our reserves, you know, in a pretty bad place and our sewage pipes older than we, you know, would prefer.
Looking quickly to see if we have another scenario slide that we've been working on but didn't put in the packet.
Chair Siegel, why Lisa's looking for that. So we had the same thought process as what you're talking about. So we had just recently thought about, you know, looking at this fund is so underfunded in the reserve portion of it is that we looked at what a 13% increase would look like compared to the 9 that we have. So if we don't have that tonight, we will definitely have it for you. We can show you we can send it out after this meeting and at least have you take a look at and maybe just by single individual emails saying that you agree with this and we should move this forward to the council. Also too, as I mentioned earlier, is that we plan on having this meeting with the 3 commissioners on the budget before we go to finance. So at that period of time, we can get their input as well too, and then be able to make the recommendation that we think that, you know, with where the reserves are in wastewater and what we asked for last year for trying to get to that 2.5 miles of replacement, this might be where we need to be.
And if I'm doing my math right, we're talking about what, $2 to $3 in the bill difference, like less than 1% of the bill.
Yeah, what I have in front of me is that the 9% is a $4.40 increase. And if we did a 15% increase, it would be $7.30.
I guess I'd add my voice to Chair Siegel. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Oh. I'd just like to expand on Chair Siegel's comment. I mean, I think, you know, listening to the presentation, which is pretty thorough, and listening to commissioner comments, I think I feel more nervous about several of the reserve funds being at or below their minimum. I feel more nervous about that than bill increases in the ranges that have been discussed. So my thought would be, you know, to go back and look a little bit, what would it take to get the reserve funds into range faster, like within a year or 2 years on the outside? Particularly, what makes me nervous is when things really go off the rails is when 2 things go wrong at once. And we already have one thing wrong, which is some of the reserve funds being at minimum or some below minimum. Also, we have giant capital plans for at least some of the utilities for electric and for wastewater. So, I mean, beyond the normal capital plans. So it just seems like if one other thing goes wrong and we don't fix the reserves, we're going to have a big problem. And it might be good to try to see if we can plan around that.
I guess I'm just adding my voice to Chair Siegel and Commissioner Metz. I mean, the trilogy that kind of convinces me is that we're deferring this maintenance, which seems pretty important. Our reserves are low and we're substantially lower than our neighboring communities in the bill, even with a 9% increase. So those three together kind of say to me, there's some room there. I don't know if the right number is 13%, but it does seem like we could be a little more aggressive here, and it's particularly the deferring the maintenance that begins to worry me a little bit.
Thank you for those comments.
Can I also just clarify that the Public Works, are they the ones that end up coming up with the prices on the major projects on the treatment side?
Yes, I should have mentioned that we have Karen North on the phone here, Assistant Director of Public Works, overseeing the treatment plant. And they do come up with those capital projects, and we have included, and they keep us up to date about it regularly. And we have incorporated those projections to the best of our ability into the forecast. And I should have mentioned that because it is not in the next year, but in the next 5-year period, it is something that that is increasing, and the full cost continues to increase and may not be fully captured. So that said, the other thing I wanted to mention is that there is some grant funding from Valley Water that Public Works is pursuing, and that very well may offset some of those treatment costs going forward and reduce the impact. So we may include that, some of that offsetting grant revenue, grant cost offsetting funds in our forecast for the financial plan.
Okay. One other question about that, or a follow-on question about that, is just the one water plan, presumably like any sort of recycling effort that we pursued would be done in conjunction with upgrades to the treatment plant. And I just don't have a great sense of how coordination happens across Public Works and CPAU in terms of water and wastewater in One Water. Are they actively, can someone just elaborate on that briefly?
Yeah, we're working closely with Public Works. We have a team of staff from Public Works and utilities that meets regularly, and they advise on every step of the way as we're moving forward in our One Water plan. So we're working collaboratively and closely. And then when we get closer to, work products and things, then they will go through the review process in both departments.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to the sea change of the set of structural changes that we might see over the next decade. Having separate water and wastewater utility rates when facilities are more tightly integrated. We may just want to think about reserve funds as even, I don't want to say commingled, but as complementary to one another. And the need for adequacy across both of them, I guess, is actually where I want to go with that. So I would similarly strongly support pulling those wastewater reserve funds up, given where I think wastewater treatment costs are heading, and the associated costs of a One Water plan that are not incorporated on the water side yet.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about how we operate with our partner cities on the treatment side? And how do we set the split rates? Like, is there a volume-based setting, and how often are those? How do we calculate the share of expense or the cost to our partner cities? How often do we do it? And I assume that, do we just basically tell them this is what your rate is going to be, and then they have to do what we're talking about, set their rates accordingly? So we're basically just a cost to them. Can you talk a little bit about how those costs of treatment are passed along?
Yeah, and I'm going to invite Karen North to comment on that.
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen North. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we have two different cost of service analysis that we do for our partners. One is the capital cost that was based on previous agreements back in the 1980s, based on what Palo Alto, all the communities requested to have of the 40 million gallons per day of basically allocation of the wastewater treatment plant. So that's one cost, and that's a fixed rate cost for all of our capital projects. And then we also have a operating cost share. And so that one is based on, and it's calculated based on trunk line analysis, looking at flow, ammonia, which is so 34% flow, 22% ammonia, 22% total suspended solids, and then also 22% oxygen demand. So it's also on a strength based. And so we share that and we give our partners quarterly bills. And we also, just like Lisa, she's part of our utilities, is a partner to the sewage treatment plant. And so we meet with our partners fairly frequently, and we give out our projections and try and keep all of our partners apprised of any upgrades to the sewage treatment plant. We're currently rebuilding the sewage treatment plant, just like all the other sewage treatment plants in the Bay Area. And we have nutrient requirements, which is that $193 million project to actually remove nutrients. And we started and we kicked off that project this year. So we're currently our plant is very busy right now with CIP work. But I'm happy to discuss that more if you have more questions.
Sorry, so it's kind of new to me, this whole area. Sure. So in terms of the measurement of you basically said 40 million gallons per day. Is that per city? Each.
So we have, that's our treatment plant capacity.
Okay.
So back in the 80s, each city bought a certain amount of capacity to the plant. Currently, we run well below that 40, but that means and we're trying to reanalyze, looking at the long range facility plan update and looking at cost of service, because this has come up with our council members. But the thing is, if we want to open up all the agreements that we have with our partners, someone will need to say they want more capacity in the sewage treatment plant. So no one's actually, we can treat up to 40 million gallons of water per day. For dry weather, we're currently around 15. So every single city has more capacity than they need currently. So one is based on capacity rights, right? So it's how much we are allocated back, our councils back in the 80s, of how much we wanted to be able to grow and develop and send to the treatment plant. The other one is on operating, and that does change and fluctuate based on flow and load. So the concentration of the wastewater constituents coming to the sewage treatment plant.
Got it. Okay. And then how frequently do those change on the operational side?
Well, we collect monthly samples throughout the collection systems for all of the partner agencies, so our whole sewer shed, and we do quarterly bills based on that monthly data.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
So that changes.
You might have said that before. I didn't. Okay.
No, that's okay. It's very complicated, especially since we have one that's a fixed share, right, on capital, and then one that's operating. So it is confusing.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the treatment plant? The one thing I want to say, though, is that we have a really good relationship with our partners, and we like to give ourselves kudos on that because not all sewage treatment plants that have partners have excellent relationships. So we try and be as transparent as we can. And just like what you're saying is let our partners know a 10-year forecast, and they can project out the rates they need to give to their constituents to pay for those costs.
Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for the presentations. I think we're done. We can take, let's come back at 8:30, quick break, and then we'll turn to item 3. Thanks. welcome back. We'll now turn to item 3, an update on the 5-year capital improvement program progress and projections. Are there any comments from the community?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. We have one hand raised on Zoom. David Cole, you may speak.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you for the discussion of the end of gas on the previous item. I can appreciate the complexities there, so I'm glad to hear the city has allocated funds to study that, and thank you very much for the discussion. On this next item, I did not see any projects related to the wastewater treatment plant in terms of treating forever chemicals or the PFAS chemicals. I believe this is another item that will come up in the future that the city should be planning for. One of the most effective ways to treat this is with the pyrolysis of our wastewater effluent. Our neighbors in Redwood City have shown quite well that this is cost effective and actually energy neutral or energy positive. So it seems that a discussion again here about future capital improvement projects related to that would be pertinent for your discussion this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have a presentation?
We do, Chair Siegel. Thank you very much for this. So this was an update that we wanted to bring forward to you tonight to talk about from a water, gas, wastewater, as well as an electric operational 5-year capital improvement program, going back a few years and then looking forward. Tonight I have with me Matt Suka, who is the Water, Gas, Wastewater Assistant Director, and Mohammed Faha from engineering. He's our new, been with us now for 5 months. Sorry, 5 months. And he is our electric manager for our engineering group. So he will be giving the update on the electric side. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Good evening, commissioners. Matt Zuka. What you have before you is, and shown on the screen, is a table sort of looking back in time and also projecting forward 5 years, evaluating the currently on what's being shown, the water, gas, and wastewater capital projects. I'll just walk the viewers through the table real briefly and then address some of the items that are in yellow. The green, we're sort of on target in terms of scope and budget. The yellows were, I would say, maybe some deviations from what was originally intended. So the table itself is structured that as you go down, we are moving forward in time from starting at fiscal year 2019. You'll see a group of projects. WMR is water main replacement, GMR gas main replacement, and SSR sanitary sewer replacement. We number these things sequentially and occasionally split them up into an A and B for different reasons. And as you go through the columns, we have the project name, sort of the original anticipated construction year, the year it was actually constructed, the proposed budget, the contract amount that we ended up finally, then this would be the final contract amount after change orders and everything, and then the actual construction period. Sort of a status and comments as well. And then again, if it's green, it was pretty much as planned, and if it was in yellow, there was a sort of a slight deviation. Starting off at the top, I would say that in 2019, and this predates me, but it sounds like an interesting project. A lot of the WMRs and GMRs were deferred and just basically pushed forward in time for a large upgrade downtown project that was sort of multi-utility, utilities, public works, do it all at once, get in, get out. Utilities had a large role on that, and it took all of the staff to get that done. So what you'll see in terms of WMR 27 and GMR 23 is that those just got carried forward in subsequent fiscal years. A small sanitary sewer project was done at the Junior Museum and Zoo, and then another small project, basically, much reduced scope, was done as well in fiscal year 2019. So the yellow highlight there showing that it was deferred. It was originally planned in fiscal year 2019. It was actually constructed in fiscal year 2020. Moving down as we go through this.
Can I
yeah,
just
please.
clarify?
Absolutely.
You had said briefly that it didn't include change orders and other things.
It does include, it was
It
final
does.
contract.
Okay,
Sorry if
great.
I probably
Thank you.
spoke that. Final contract amount. Just scrolling down, what you'll see here is that most of these projects are sort of on schedule, on time, on budget, if you will. We had one large reservoir project, the Corte Madera Reservoir, that was a pre-stressed concrete that was actually done on a design build procurement methodology that came in, well under budget. I think the next sort of deviation, if you will, from plan, which is in GMR 24, was actually by design. And we had a large opportunity for a grant on the order of, right now, it's pending $12 million with the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration. And so what we wanted to do was create two projects, a 24A, which was a gas replacement project on Stanford, sort of in the mall area, and proceed with that, not delay, but then shift 24B, we created that as sort of a new project in order to allow us to apply for the grant funding. You had to go in with a shovel-ready project. You couldn't just say, I'm going to take your money and I'm going to go do something with it. So we had to sort of package the project up. That's what we had designed. That's currently pending the PHMSA award, and we're hoping to find out about that grant sometime here in the first part of this calendar year. Scrolling on down to the Park Reservoir, which is sort of the next, this is really more a schedule issue. We have 2 reservoir projects that are remaining. The good news here is that out of the 8 reservoirs we have, these are the last 2. The remainder have sort of been replaced, I would say, within roughly the first, they're within the first quarter to a third of their anticipated useful life. And the first round of RFP, a request for proposal that went out, we did not get any responses. So that's a whole process. As you can imagine, they have to go back and triage. Why did we not get responses, socialize it, and reissue the RFP. That has a trickle-down effect into the Dahl Reservoir because we only want to be doing one of these at a time. We don't want to be doing 2 tanks at the same time and taking them both offline. It just affects the operation of the water system. So, scrolling on down to fiscal year 26, which is when the Dahl Reservoir upgrade would be programmed in. That's the ripple effect that you see there, moving from Park into Dahl. I'll back up to SSR 31. Here, the contract amount, and this project is currently in progress, so this reflects the actual contracted amount, not the total. The original budget was 7.3 million, contract was 7.7. To be honest, this was just an underestimation of the actual level of effort it was going to take to replace sewer mains in El Camino. State highway, lots of traffic control, the utility is quite deep, and it's really more the difficulty of estimating the cost of that kind of a project. So those are the deviations. I'll sort of stop from there and see if there's any questions on sort of the water, gas, and wastewater capital projects. But everything else, for the time being at least, is looking like it's. I will point out also, currently on here, we're still showing SSR 32, which is the next sewer project. And as you heard in the financial plan previously, that's the one that's sort of on the table for deferment by a couple of years to allow for the reserves to catch up. I will say it was music to my ears as the person responsible for designing and building this stuff, that there's some reluctance to not increase the rates, or some desire to potentially increase them more. And certainly SSR 32 is sort of the big knob that we have in terms of how you can see the $11 million price tag, and how that affects that fund. So, the way I look at it is this is a long-term program. We were previously here at Commission talking about probably 30 to 50 years with the projects, and it's the first gate. My main concern is less about the first gate and more that this doesn't become a stretched out accordion. I don't want, if we need to hit them on the 2-year mark. The first one doesn't worry me as much as it does that it can't become a wider accordion, if you will, just to give it a sort of a visual. But I think that hopefully we can make something happen. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions, and then we'll go to electric after.
First of all, I love the color chart, so thank you for that. It's such a quick way to see how things are going. I did have a question on the GMR 25. On the chart, it's looks like it's everything's on target, and in the packet, packet page 110, it talks about that it describes what it is, and then it said, if federal funding is not awarded, the scope of the project will be reduced to approximately 20,000 linear feet. Staff submitted a federal grant and is expected to be notified in February. So I guess I'm wondering how you decide whether something, if it's expected to be on target here, but there's this note here, how those go together.
Good, and thank you for the question, because I want to clarify my comment on 24 first. That was the first round of grant funding. We didn't get the first round of grant funding. We're proceeding with 24B with our funds, and we reapplied under 25. So just, I didn't quite capture that one accurately. So we do have, we are anticipating some of these grant funds coming in. It allowed us to expand the scope of the project. It's not like these grant funds are being used. We weren't at zero and we're now adding 12 million. We're adding 12 million to the overall fund. We're going to spend it on infrastructure, and then that's going to basically have a net ripple effect through the entire enterprise fund financially. With that being said, I think it's about 2.5 million of extra that we're adding in that year in order to accommodate and absorb those grant funds. So if we don't get the grant, for example, and I'm going off of memory here, the proposed budget would probably drop down to, let's say, 8.5 million, and that would be the project that we would move forward with. This is intended to, we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to get the grant, and so we want to kind of plan on it, partly because we also have to be able to design and deliver a project on that schedule with our staff.
That's helpful. I guess part of my question is if, hopefully we get the grant, all is good. But if the grant doesn't come in, then the project is shrunk and the mains that aren't replaced, what happens then? You already have the next project.
Sure, they would, the ones that don't get replaced get shifted to GMR 26, and then the subset lower priority would get shifted down. So it's basically everything gets moved.
Okay, so presumably these are the next highest priority, and so they still will be the next highest.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just changing the sequence, and we're stretching out the accordion a little bit because we didn't get the cash infusion.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much. We'll turn it over to Mohammed Fatah to answer questions and present on the electric.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dean. Commissioners, nice to meet you. And it's good to be back in Palo Alto. I was part of the founding team on the fiber side here back in 2000. And I went around the globe and came back and ended up back in Palo Alto here. So very excited. My story is not going to be as flowery as Matt's here. We, as you can see, we don't have as much activity there, but that's certainly going to change here as well. We've been impacted by COVID. Things came to almost a screeching halt. You can see that we've worked a couple of projects here, capital projects there as well. And then we were impacted by a mass exodus of engineers either retiring or moving on from City Palo Alto there as well. We've been recruiting. We've hired younger engineers. So our approach to obviously bringing things back together is going to be a little bit different there. We've reorganized the team under functions now. So we've got a T&D team. We've got a substation team. We've got a team that focuses on customer service, customer support as well. And then we've got a team that focuses on fiber to the home and the dark fiber backbone system there as well. Our strategic focus is number one is grid modernization there. So there's a big emphasis, of course, on driving the modernization effort here as well. The penetration of electric vehicles in Palo Alto is second to none in the nation here. We're about 30 to 35%. It's incredible the number of applications that are coming through permitting for adding Tesla Powerwalls, as well as connecting vehicles. Apartments are rewiring their parking lots, their wherever cars parked, and everyone wants to have a charging station. So we're keeping up with the demand, of course, and so electrification is real. It's happening. We're seeing a doubling of the demand And as you've probably heard in previous sessions, that our capacity is probably at 50% of where it needs to be. There's about a 25% CAGR on the increase of electric vehicles there as well. And so that's an annual increase of about 25% there as well. There are incentives for citizens in Palo Alto to move into heat pumps, both for environmentals as well as for heating their water heaters as well. And there are many takers for these services. Again, it's pent-up demand there as well. So grid modernization, we have broken up the city into sectors, and we have a good feel for areas that need to be primary areas for focus. For the moment, we've looked for synergies because we have a parallel project going on, which is fiber to the home. And we've combined the two projects in order to achieve economies of scale and be able to drive cost-efficient construction for the upgrade of the network, both the fiber as well as the electric network there as well. The fiber to the premise project is ongoing. We are currently in the design stage of the effort there as well, but we expect that we're going to break ground sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks by placing and replacing poles initially, and then starting to move the infrastructure forward. Initial areas of change, we're focusing on replacing the 4 kV, which is antiquated from the 50s, 4 kV system into 12 kV, potentially retiring some substations there as well to consolidate our efforts and focus on driving efficiencies on the 12 kV and the transmission system there as well. As part of Grid Mod, it's a 5-year program, of course. I think you've seen parts of it there as well. We're currently focusing on driving the learning curve so that we learn how and where areas we can get the biggest bang for our buck will be there as well. We anticipate the first segments of the Grid Mod services to become or come live sometime in the June-July timeframe of this year here as well, with the fiber network following there as well. And that is the pilot program or pilot area that's been selected for this program there as well. Second, we have, or third, I'd say, strategic focus is the Hanover substation, which is the Tesla project, which is currently going through permitting. And we anticipate breaking ground with Tesla sometime in the next 3 to 4 weeks there as well, with an anticipated turn-up date of September. There'll be more to come on the Hanover substation upgrade project as well. It's a major public-private effort strategy there as well. And the reason why I'm saying it's a major effort because Tesla is moving very quickly. We're not able to, given the processes that we have to follow, we can't move as quick. So the investment is actually being made by Tesla, which will be recovered eventually by the city of Palo Alto, right, for operation. And then, of course, new customer connections. We're seeing apartments start to come up, or condominiums as well. Our efforts, of course, are to try to position the fiber facilities at these apartments as they come together. So prospective buyers or tenants will have options for communication services, which will include dark fiber or lit fiber from City of Palo Alto there as well. We certainly, we've gone through a SWOT analysis, identified our key threats. The key threats are supply chain instability and labor shortage. Did mention that there are several folks from the engineering staff have left Palo Alto, so it's been a challenge in terms of recruiting and hiring new engineers. Engineers are moving into more lucrative areas. You know, AI is really big, ML is really big, so there's a major move there. But we've been successful in hiring younger engineers who are really passionate about the power industry. Some who are seeing the power industry going through a renaissance right now, moving from being a stodgy service provider of electricity to being truly the backbone of anything that's electric that has to be charged, and the growth of the electric markets there as well. in terms of labor shortage, we're trying to hire and create an environment where it's sticky for the younger folks so that they can grow. We're creating a rotation programs. So engineers, we're too small to have specialized engineers, but 2-year programs where they can spend time designing and building and supporting and maintaining substations, and then they'll rotate to transmission, rotate through distribution, do customer connections, customer services, and they'll essentially be well-rounded engineers once all that is done there as well. I talked about supply chain instability there as well. So the cost of transformers has more than doubled in the past 5 years. We're having to contend with this. The lead time for transformers is anywhere between 60 to 300% of what it used to be in the past. Cable, especially aerial cable, is with the fires that have gone on in California, has become a very difficult commodity to get a hold of. So we have a huge emphasis focused on trying to drive relationships between vendors and manufacturers, of course, right? Although Palo Alto is small, but I think we're trying to affiliate ourselves with other local utilities there as well. And as part of that is we're driving product management expertise and a center of excellence for supply chain there as well, in terms of training the new engineers that are coming on board here to specialize in transformers or poles or electric cables or wires or switches and so on and so forth as well. And with the goal of obviously approaching and being closer to our supplier community here to have a voice, of course, there and help drive cost-efficient supply chain there as well. So to point you back to the spreadsheet here, we've had several projects that we focused on here in the fiscal year 23-24, and then essentially underground District 46, which was actually completed, and then the capacitor installation bank in Hanover substation. Those were 2 successful projects that were completed before we had the mass exodus of the engineers that left the company here as well. Currently, we're focused on the Foothills Underground program, and that's obviously for fire prevention there as well. The reason why it's been delayed till next year is because we're seeking easements for some of the electrical facilities that have to go on in the space there to support that. The AMI project is ongoing, of course, right? It's got its own program that it's following there as well. And then we're going through a major update of our substation security systems there, including cameras, walls, raising the walls as well there as well. And several of these substations are currently going through permitting for the modifications that are going to take place there as well. And then last but not least, of course, substation breaker replacement. We have oil circuit breakers which have been there for 50 years or so. Some of them don't have spare parts and so on and so forth. So we're going through a major review of the existing infrastructure there to invest and bring it up to date there as well. The 2 major projects that I would say 80% of the engineering staff is focused on is GridMod and FTTP. And we're making every effort to try to see wherever we can find synergies there as well, so that if we're visiting a pole, we're visiting the pole once there as well to do both the electric as well as the communications infrastructure there as well. Any questions I can help address?
On the AMI project, so as I look at the spreadsheet, the actual for the projects that are ongoing, that's the actual spend to date. That's not compared to the budget, right?
Yes.
So when I look at the AMI project, which is now scheduled to go through July 1st, 5.3 million has been spent out of a $11.6 million budget.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And the green means it's on budget, but my understanding was I thought we were going to be AMI complete residentially by much sooner than that. So is that a stretched out project or?
Stretched out, yeah.
So it's a little bit, to me, it's a little confusing to be green and delayed by more than a year.
Yeah, for the residential side, that we're still on target to finish by December of 2024. It's just the commercial side that we're expected to finish by middle of next year.
Okay, that's great. So you're still on target for the end of
24 for residential.
24 for residential. Okay.
Right. And as of today, I think we've installed 12,000 meters already. So we're about 16% done. So
Out
they
of
are
24,000, 22,000 hours.
12,000 right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so we're moving towards there. We're confident we can get done.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. On grid mod, which looks like it's $160 million over the next 5 years, when will we be able to see some detail of what's in there?
It's actually a work in progress. I don't have a specific date of when we'll come back to the UAC, but we're actually actively working through the 4 segments of the city that we're focused on, driving the inventory of how many poles we have, how many miles of cable and wire we have, and which ones need to be replaced. So there'll be a formal program that's going to be presented to you here. I don't have a date for it as of yet.
Okay, thank you.
I had one kind of nit, but in the packet on page 124 at 5.4.1 on fiber sales, there's this comment that Magellan had to perform engineering redesign and surveying work to minimize and align underground construction with grid modernization. Can you explain what that is and how much we're paying them extra for that?
You want it? Yeah. Yeah. So essentially Magellan started, their whole focus was on fiber. But then as we took a step back and we said, well, you know, this is an area that, this is the preliminary area that we're going to invest for grid mod as well. So we brought the two together, and it made sense for, there was a, Magellan was acquired by another company. And essentially that company has contracts with PG&E and AT&T and local companies. It made sense for us to partner with them as well for the electrical design work as well. So essentially they're doing both the fiber as well as the electric design work as well.
But, okay, so maybe I misread it, because what it reads to me here is that they had to do not additional work, but rework of prior projects that they worked on. I don't know, Dave, do you have something to add?
Can you re-ask the question? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand. It said Magellan had to perform redesign and surveying work, and I'm just wondering what that whether it was repeat or not, I guess, and how much more we're spending.
So like Mohammed said, their plan was just to do the telecom side of it. But now that since we're adding the grid mod with it, they're gonna have to go back and redo the poles on some of them. So some of the poles that didn't need replacement because of the telecom side may need replacement now because of the extra weight we'll be adding onto the poles. So I think that's what they're looking at too.
Okay, and I thought we also were, is that part of the pole replacement? Okay, got it, thanks.
Essentially the scope widened there, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll turn to commissioner comments and reports for meetings. Any comments or meeting reports? Probably not. Maybe some good holiday parties. Any future topics for upcoming meetings that we need to consider?
I had one topic, which is actually in the quarterly report. It was mentioned that their utility staff regularly reviews new renewable energy generation proposals, and there were a couple solar proposals that we decided we weren't interested in. Staff decided not to move forward with them due to desire to diversify the city's electric supply portfolio. So we just went through the process of hearing about, you know, what our long-term plans are, our desire to contract for new renewables going forward, and it was heavily weighted towards solar. And, I was one of the people who was kind of like sad to see some of these, or disappointed to see some of these more stable supply, base supplies expiring, and seeing if we could continue with those. So one of the thoughts one of the things I would like to hear about is there was a defense of the solar, it seems like everyone's, we know there's going to be a lot more solar built in the next decade or decades. And there was a comment made that even if we do go with a lot of solar, the benefit of trading our solar away or selling our solar away is we're taking gas offline elsewhere. And to me, it sounds like, there's lots of solar being built everywhere. And I'd like to kind of delve into that a little bit more to understand if we are investing in more solar and we have even more oversupply in, daylight hours in the summer, and we're trading those away, I imagine there's got to be some long-term forecast about the buyers of that excess energy. And who are we taking out? Are we truly taking gas offline over the long term, or is it just in the short term until everyone else also is in the same position of having built a lot of solar? So I guess the request would be, if we are saying that investing in solar is still where we want to be, because we're still taking offline gas, with the excess solar that we have, I'd like to kind of understand, where is that energy going? Who are the people who are using gas, who are taking our excess solar energy, and what do those projections look like over time? So if we're entering into new solar contracts, do we have confidence that there's a place for that excess energy to go over the long term? I don't know what you call that in terms of a topic, but it's almost like, projection of renewables and where our excess, what is a projection for, is it going to eventually, we're going to have to pay someone to take our excess, or is there, how long is the market going to exist?
Yeah, two things. One is the topic we just discussed, namely getting some flesh for the grid mod project, since it's the biggest capital project on the table, and we haven't seen any detail for it. Also, but not quite new things, but there's a long list of things that are not calendared that are sort of below the calendar that be good to at least tentatively schedule.
Commissioner Metz, so to answer your first question, I think the thing is that if you remember, it was last month or the month before that, when Jonathan came and talked a little bit about the resiliency and study that we were going to do. I think some of your questions will be answered in that portion, as well as we can get you some, I guess this goes back to the whole discussion about looking at maps, looking at what details that you're really looking for. I guess the question is that this is more of a construction type of project portion. Right. I know that we've had conversations, and I know that it's probably difficult for the commission to think about that. We are looking at $350 million. We come to you, we ask you to look at our approval portion of a budget dollar amounts. And we talk about what's in those dollars, but we don't really give you full details on a project like this. And I think the thing is that, we do owe that information to all of you, that where those dollars are going to be spent and how they're spent. The question about it is that I guess I'm still struggling with in my own mind is, what does that report actually look like? And how can I help kind of craft this report that, that's going to help all of you to be able to answer the questions around what this grid mod is and what are we going to do and how are we going to spend these dollars, I guess. So Like I said, I apologize for this because I keep on going around and around on this, but I'm struggling on what the commission or how I can show all of you in a report standby that basically is in my mind, I guess I'm just making this way too simple in my mind, is that it's a construction project that we didn't call it grid mod and we just said that we were going to upgrade the system, we're going to upgrade the system and we're going to put in some new transformers, we're going to add some new poles, we're going to add some new wire, and away we go.
Maybe I don't know if this will be helpful, but we're going to have to issue a bond.
Yep.
And with that will be some discussion about why the voters are being asked to approve a bond.
Right.
And so maybe it's, if thinking about it from that perspective of how we are going to inform voters about a bond, and then knowing ahead of, and having that in our minds ahead of time as we talk about it, might be one way to approach it.
I think it's about, here are our goals for, here's a reason why the ratepayers in Palo Alto should spend $300+ million. Here's what we will achieve if you spend that money. Here's what we'll spend it on and when, and here's what we won't spend it on, and here's why. I think, I guess I'm just sort of surprised by the question in the sense that, like, for wastewater treatment, right? We have budgets for $20 million for this, $30 million for that. And we ask questions, why do you need this thing? And it was explained and it makes sense and we just do it. So I think it's the same thing here. We're just, I'm just sort of puzzled that we have like $2 million items with details and a $300 million item with none. And it just doesn't make sense.
I think maybe speaking for myself, what I would like to see is, what is the end state? What do we get for the $300 million? Not in terms of, extra poles or transformers or this, but in the end of, as a citizen, what would I be able to do when this is complete? Or how will my life be different, or commercially, or how will the environment be improved? Grid modernization is a relatively easy phrase to say, but I'm not 100% sure what it all entails and how much of it is, some substratum that are things we would need to do anyway, just to kind of maintain, I suspect. But the other question is, okay, if we don't do this, in Palo Alto, we will not be able to support more than this many electric vehicles, or we will not be able to support more than this many homes that install solar, or this other thing will happen. Whatever, because, I share, maybe you are hypothesizing, maybe looking too much into details. It's a construction project. Yeah, I get that at the end of the day, that's what it is, but it's a construction project, hopefully with a purpose to build a capability. And I would like to understand what that capability is.
So I guess that when I look at it, and I guess this is where I really struggle, is that when Tom Marshall has brought a few of his presentations, I understand that they're pretty cryptic and they're very short. However, it does talk about what the value is at the end of the project portion. It talks about that, we are going to increase the capacity to the homeowners so that they can do whole electrification at their home. Right now, today, we don't have enough capacity to be able to do that for charger, stove, heat pump, water heater, range, so on. And so I guess I'm trying to step back into all of your shoes and trying to understand that what I can bring. I think this helps a little bit more about talking about, it's more than just, as you mentioned, Commissioner Phillips, about adding some poles, adding some wire, whatever goes into the construction standpoint and the engineering. And I get Commissioner Met's understanding about, maybe I can look at it as, okay, what is the value? Because we always talk about the value of when we replace a water tank. Okay, it comes to the end of the life, we need to replace it, so I have a little bit better of an idea that I can formulate, and we'll talk to the team about what we can do about bringing a report in the next couple of months to the commission on what this project actually looks like and what the values are going to be, because I agree that there has to be something for it, for all the residents, as well as, maybe the thing is that when we look at this bond, in the future portion of it, it's going to have the scope, and we're going to have to explain really what we're asking to bond. And I think that, I think that we need to start getting the word out to the public as a whole, and actually have them start understanding about where these large costs are going to be and what the effect of that cost of that bond is going to be from a rate payer standpoint. And I don't think right now, probably if we talk to the average person, if we brought 10 people in here, they probably don't really know that much about what grid mod's all about. So, I need to think about that. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
That's what they agree on.
So I thank you for that.
And then, we have quite a long list of to be scheduled and a pretty blank calendar. And I don't know if putting some of them on the calendar is problematic from your end, but it would be nice to see the list shrinking and seeing them calendared, even knowing that some will have to get moved around as things come up.
Yeah, we can do that. We cleared, it did take us a little bit of time from a staff standpoint to clear out some of the items that had been on there for some period of time. We can go through here. We will schedule up some of these items that still need to be back in discussion in this coming next 11 months in the rolling calendar, and then we can take a look and see what else comes up. And Commissioner Croft will also take a look at putting something together about talking about solar, and then, what the advantages of the solar, and then how does it impact taking off generation as a whole.
Yeah, I just don't want to influence the choices that anyone's making with an uneducated view, right?
Right.
Just like
Excellent. Exactly.
And
Okay.
many of these topics that are on the list but not on the calendar impact grid mod, right? Like the distributed energy discussion, the solar discussion, all those things have to be ingredients in how the grid turns out, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's like the second transmission line update, maybe that's something that I can give once in a while in the general manager's meeting, because there isn't really a whole lot of movement on that. We're still trying to work through CAISO and PG&E on this. This is not a hot topic for PG&E right now. But I do have a little bit more insight on that. So maybe some of these could be that I could give an update on a quarterly basis. And then if there's something that does happen, then we can bring back as a report as a whole to the commission with that.
There was one of these that I flagged, I say is sort of a different category, which is the cybersecurity. We had a discussion of that, I think maybe a year ago, and unfortunately is a moving target. We should probably update on that.
Yeah, I think that as we talked about, I think this came on in the last couple of months about cybersecurity, and then also the permit process. I need to reach out to the director of IT, and then also Jonathan Lath, who you all met for the process of the permitting process. I just need to reach out to them and figure out a timeline when they can come speak to us as a whole on the commission.
Thank you. I think we're ready to adjourn. Anyone want to move to adjourn?
So,
Second, we can all wave like on the Zoom days. Thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year.